welcome to the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, where we are all about technology, creativity, innovation, and all of those practical ideas that you can use in class right away. My name is Matt Miller. I'm the author of Ditch That Textbook and the host of the summit. And in today's session, we're going to be talking about AI. So there's been discussions about teacher AI. We need to know, how do we equip teachers, to sort of like survive and thrive in this AI world as teachers. But then there's also student AI literacy. How do we equip students? How do we prepare them, especially for, this technology that's rapidly changing, for a future that we can't really even predict? How do we do that? And so in today's session, we're going to get super, super practical on how that fits in the regular classroom. And usually this is the point where I pull somebody in and I introduce them to you, but guess what? You get me for this one, because I've been working a lot on all of this AI literacy stuff for students. I've got lots of ideas. I've got some practical things that have come right out of my own classroom that I'd love to share with you, and also a book that, as of the recording of this video, I'm putting the finishing touches on. So if you're watching this in 2025, it'll be ready soon. And if you're watching it in the future, further off into the future, you can probably go get it right now. So anyway, I wanted to dive right into this so that we can start talking about this idea of AI literacy for students. So the title of the session here is Stronger AI Literacy, Teaching and Learning in Any Class. And so let's just start right there. The concept that AI is changing how we work and how we live. And honestly, you don't have to look around. All you have to do is look around, really, to start to see all of the changes. I mean, ChatGPT was released to the world in November of 2022, and since then, we've started to see all of these fast changes in the large language models that we interact with in text. Even now, those, things like ChatGPT and Google Gemini have become multimodal. So now we can use images, we can use text, it can create a variety of different things. It can make video, it can make code. We're seeing computer vision models that are able to identify things. And we just got all of this stuff that's coming on with artificial intelligence. And, look around at the news and you see all of this money, billions and billions and billions of dollars being poured into artificial intelligence to strengthen the technology. And I mean, you look around and you hear all of this talk about how jobs are changing. Some jobs are becoming obsolete. Some new jobs are being created. You hear this quote being thrown around all the time that AI might not replace you, but somebody who knows how to use it will, which I think there's some truth to, but I think there's a little bit of extra nuance in all of that. And as teachers, as educators, hopefully we'll look at it through this lens also, that we want our students to be prepared for this world. And as this technology is changing things, I think everybody looks at it and we realize that these students are going to need to be equipped for different things than we were as we were growing up. And even, students that graduated within the last several years, we prepared them for a certain world, and now we're starting to see that all of this is starting to change. And so we've started to hear more and more about this concept called AI literacy. My simple definition of AI literacy is the skills and knowledge that you need to be able to survive and thrive in a world full of artificial intelligence. You need certain skills to be able to do certain things. You need certain knowledge to be able to understand and to be able to survive and thrive. Surviving has to do with being responsible. It has to do with protecting yourself. But then thrive also, to be able to use those skills to do more in the right places and to know what it's capable of and everything. And so we've got lots of folks that are talking about AI literacy. And I don't know about you, but when I hear conversations about AI literacy, sometimes it's from people that are very distant from the classroom. And they will say things like, students need to know this about AI, and students need to know this about AI. And I look at it and I go, our schools aren't easily built right now. We need changes, but our schools right now aren't built very easily to plug a lot of that stuff in. You start to talk to teachers, and I know a lot of times whenever we look at it as teachers, We look at something new like this. It used to be digital literacy, digital citizenship. There's been all sorts of these initiatives that have come along with technology, and even before, where it's very easy for classroom teachers to go, oh, AI literacy, that's something for the tech teacher. That's something that we'll give that to the tech teacher and they'll do some lessons on it and then we'll be good. And I get that because I'm in the classroom right now too, so I get it that I have tests and quizzes and assignments to grade, and I have lessons to plan, and I have instruction, and I have all of these duties and tasks and everything, and it just kind of feels like it's one extra thing. Oh, it's another thing that we've got to do. But the reality, I think, is that AI literacy, if we want students to really be prepared for this, it's up to all of us. It's up to all of us to squeeze little moments into our classes. And when you hear it like that, you might go, see, again, it sounds like something extra on my plate. But the reality is that some of these AI literacy lessons aren't just another thing. It's actually something that can help us teach what we're teaching already. So now it doesn't just become, oh man, there's one other, duty, there's one other responsibility on my plate. No, some of these things that we can do that help students learn AI literacy actually support the instruction that we're doing anyway. And if we just make a couple of little small shifts in the way that we word things, or in the way that we bring things up, or the way that we teach things, we can actually equip students with lots of very powerful AI literacy understandings and some of that knowledge without having to change around a ton of what we're doing in our classroom. And so I started to see it in my own class, in my own high school Spanish classes that I was teaching, and I was starting to see, some of these conversations that would just sort of organically come up in my own class. And I started to see, wow, these are AI literacy conversations, and I'm teaching high school Spanish 3 or Spanish 1 or whatever. And it started to dawn on me that a lot of these things fit so nicely into the classroom. And so the more examples that I came up with, and the more I thought about it, and the more that I talked to other teachers, I realized I've got a whole book of this stuff, of how AI can support what we teach, but also little things that we can do to help students be prepared for that world. And so that's this book, AI Literacy in Any Class. And so what I'd like to do for you today, I've got 6 things that I've pulled out of the book that I'd like to share with you, actually with a bonus one at the end. We're going to see if I can get through all of this in the amount of time that we have together. But I wanted to walk you through some of those things right out of the book that you can start doing right away in your own class. If you see all of this and you're going, I want students to be prepared for this, for this future that is so hard to envision. I want them to be prepared for a world full of AI, but I also know that I've got class to teach. If that's you, I feel you. I'm in the same boat. I totally get it. Here are some things that we can kind of look at together. So let's just start with number 1, shall we? And this is actually right at the very beginning of my book, which is to set a strong foundation. One of the big things that we've got to be very aware of if we want to equip students with skills that are going to help them in AI literacy is that as teachers, we've got to have a strong foundation of our own AI literacy too. Now, what that doesn't mean is that you have to go and get a degree in computer science. You don't have to be an expert in, machine learning or large language models or, any of that stuff. You just have to have a good, solid foundation of sort of how the technology works, but also how humans should be and shouldn't be interacting with it. And so to kind of help you get up to speed, I wanted to share with you 4. These are like my 4 main keys that I always lean back on when it comes to humans interacting with artificial intelligence. And after you see my list and you hear me kind of talk through it and everything, maybe you'll come up with your own list too of, how do you want to show up when it comes to artificial intelligence? What are the things that you do and don't want to do? What are the things that you want to emphasize? So here are my 4. And we'll kind of go down through these real quickly. And then you might even consider, if you've worked with large language models like ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Microsoft Copilot, if you've worked with them some, you've already got sort of a feel of what feels like it's right and feels like it's a little bit off. And so you can start to kind of build some of your own here too. So here are some of my basics. Number one, human thinking before AI. I know for me, and I think for lots of folks too, that if we start with AI and we ask AI to, build me a list, give me some ideas, write me a draft, then a lot of that human thinking, a lot of that human work gets done before we even start to cognitively engage with the task. I heard a speaker once say, he was like, "Oh, well, when I use AI, I just let it do the first draft and then I just go and make adjustments." And I thought, and he was talking to a bunch of teachers, and I thought, wow, talk about really missing the vibe in the room, because as teachers, we know that the thinking work is the important part. And so when I show up as a human, if it's something that's important, I want to do the human thinking first myself. And the more that we can model that to students, the more that we can even talk about it, the more that we can set up our classes where the activities that students are doing, they do the human thinking first, and then maybe they augment it or support it with artificial intelligence. That's just one of those basic keys, but I think that one's super important. Number two, this is one, if you've been around the education space and heard people talking about artificial intelligence, you've probably heard a version of this: process over product. This is why I think this is so important. It's because artificial intelligence is so good at creating the end product. It can write the essay, it can write the research report, it can find the answer to your question, it can generate all sorts of things in text and images and everything. And so if all we're doing is looking at the finished product, that's something that AI is really good at. But what we also realize, I think, a lot of times as educators, is that a lot of the good that happens in learning happens through the process, where the students are actually wrestling with concepts and they're doing the messy work that comes to the end. And so I think the more that we can validate the process, the more that we can put emphasis on the process, then the better chance that we have of students not just skipping to the end product and then cognitively outsourcing the end product. You know what I mean by cognitively outsourcing, right? Like, we're going to outsource the thinking to AI. I don't want to do the thinking myself. I'm just going to hand it off to AI. And so what are some ways to do that? Well, I think one very simple way is to look at how we assign points in the grade book to the work that students are doing. Because we know that, I know especially for a lot of my students in my high school classes, they're very grade centric. And so if something has points in the grade book, that sort of communicates a message from the teacher of how you should value it. And if the end product is the thing that has a ton of the points and the process leading up to it has nothing, what's the message that we're communicating? We're communicating that the process is not as important. So that's number two. Number three, always be critiquing. So with this, artificial intelligence can create a lot of stuff for us. It can create summaries, it can create lists, it can help us brainstorm ideas, it can help us to sharpen the work that we're doing. It can create text and images and videos and all sorts of different things. Anytime AI comes into the mix, it's an opportunity to critique how it did its work. So if AI writes us a summary of something that we're learning, it's not just, oh, great, now I have a summary. It's an opportunity to sit down with students and go, okay, AI created this. What do you think about it? Is it any good? Is it accurate? Did it hit all of the most important points? Is there anything that it left out? Is there anything missing? Is anybody's perspective missing? If we always take opportunities to critique AI work, then that can be huge. And then number four, this is just a simple one. Keep the main thing the main thing. Sometimes I think, especially with educational technology, sometimes people go, oh, I have this new tool. How can I use it? How can I make it fit in class? Well, we've got to keep focused on the stuff that is most important, which is the learning, which is, what are our main objectives? What are our main goals? And can the technology serve that? So that's just a little thing that I think is important along the way. But really, this is our opportunity, little by little over time, to grow our own AI literacy. If we want to empower our students and help them to be prepared for this future, we've got to be ready to grow our own AI literacy. And the nice thing is that it doesn't mean that you have to take a course. It doesn't mean you have to get a new degree. You don't have to get any certifications or anything. It's just the more that you interact with AI, the more lessons you will learn about its application and what's right and what's wrong and everything. And if we're willing to talk about and impart some of that stuff to our students, that can be the really good stuff. Okay, so that's sort of our strong foundation. Now, it's time to take a turn for the practical and go, okay, if I've got this foundation of AI literacy myself, and I want it to start showing up in my class, but I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, what are some things that I can do? Because, for me, I would say I'm a Spanish teacher. And so, I have standards to meet. I have curriculum to go through. I have things that I need to accomplish as a Spanish teacher. I'm not a computer science teacher. I'm not an AI teacher. So it's going to have to fit in some way. Well, here's some ways that it can fit. Let's move on to number 2. This is to squeeze AI literacy into conversations. I have noticed this happening in some, from time to time in my own class, where, let's say in my high school Spanish classes, I've put an AI image up on the screen and we're going to describe it in Spanish. So in that case, I'm using AI to make instructional materials. But then, students might notice a little bit of what I like to call AI weirdness in the picture, and they'll go, oh, we noticed that, somebody has an extra finger or an extra arm, or, oh, that pole doesn't connect the way it's supposed to, and oh, look at the weird lines on the floor or something like that. And so that's where I could pop up and say, oh, by the way, did you know that when AI generates images, it can create things like this called artifacts, where something looks a little bit off. And it's a good way for you to know what's artificial and what's real. So if you're not sure if it's like an authentic photograph or not, you can look for these artifacts. Did you notice that I started that little sentence with the words, oh, by the way, did you know? And then all I did was I just injected a little truth, injected a little bit of wisdom about artificial intelligence, and it took all of about 20 or 30 seconds. I think the more that we learn about AI, if we are just kind of paying attention, we can do these little things where we inject just a teeny tiny little truth about AI into class. And I like to call these by the way lessons. You notice that I use the words, oh, by the way, did you know? And you may have already used by the way lessons in your teaching throughout your educational career. For lots of us, no matter what it is that we teach, we have little things that we like to remind students of that aren't written in the lesson plans. They aren't actually in our instructional materials. But if they come up in conversation, then we have something to give them. If we start to equip ourselves with some of these little quick by the way lessons, and we just inject it into conversation every so often, you might be shocked at the things that students remember whenever we throw them in that way. So like a couple of them that you have on the screen. Oh, by the way, did you know that AI produces incorrect information sometimes? So if you have it make something for you, it's always important to read through it and make sure that it's accurate. Or if you go down to the bottom one, oh, by the way, did you know that if you overuse AI in the real world, like in your job or something, it has real consequences? If it makes a mistake and you pass it off as your own, then that's basically your mistake and you own it. So be really, really careful. Just little things like this. They're called by the way lessons. And see, this is another one of those examples where if you see the importance of equipping students with some of these things about AI as they go forward, this is a teeny tiny little way that you can inject it into class. And this doesn't even take any time. It's really no prep. It doesn't take any time any more than just the 30 seconds or minute that it takes for you to have that conversation. So I like to call those by the way lessons. And so that's a way that you can squeeze AI literacy into just about any conversation. And here comes another one. By the way, did you know that if you want to incorporate some of these by the way lessons into what you teach, you can always, I'm going to try to remind you of this throughout this session, you can always jump over to an AI assistant like ChatGPT or Google Gemini and say, hey, I heard this idea of this thing called by the way lessons, where you Teach students AI literacy by giving them a little nugget of wisdom whenever it comes up in conversation. Can you give me some examples of that? And see, all you have to do is just, really with just about anything that I talk about in this session, if you show up to ChatGPT or Google Gemini or whatever your AI assistant is and you ask for more examples, that's a good way if I haven't given you enough. Also remember, there either is going to be a book or there already is a book, depending on when you're watching this. So, I would love for you to read the book and get more examples, but if you need more, you can always just ask AI. Okay, let's keep moving. So another way to incorporate AI literacy into what you're already doing is just to amplify what you already teach. So all you really have to do is just continue teaching what you're already teaching. But if you use AI to amplify it some, if you use AI to augment your teaching, to create teaching materials, to give your students things to explain, then whenever AI shows up to the party, you can always talk about the work that it did and use it as a way to really create new conversations about what it is that you're teaching. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. So here are 4 ideas, 4 ways to amplify what you already teach with AI. So here are a couple of them. Number 1, invite AI judgment on what we're studying. So if we're studying a particular topic, you could always put an AI assistant like ChatGPT or Google Gemini up on the screen and say, hey, we're learning about this and such. What's your take on this? And of course, you can ask AI to analyze just about anything, and usually it will. And so once you read that, you could have students look at it and go, okay, this is what AI just said about this particular topic that we're studying. What do you think? What do you think about its reasoning? What do you think about its rationale? Does it make sense? Is it accurate? And see, just right there, giving students an opportunity to analyze what AI said, it does 2 things. Number 1, it gives them something to talk about related to what they're already learning. So that's strengthening their learning and encouraging deeper thinking. But then number 2, it's also helping them to improve their AI literacy by analyzing it. Number 2, you can prompt AI for reflection questions. So if you're learning about something, studying something, practicing something, you can ask AI to ask you questions about your learning. So for instance, if you're studying something in history, you can ask AI to help you reflect on what you've learned. And it might ask you things like, how does this compare to other periods in time? How does this compare to your own life? What are some things that you're struggling with? What are some things that don't sit right with you? So it's really kind of like sitting down with a, smart, inquisitive friend who will ask you questions. Number 3, ask AI for new voices or viewpoints that your students hadn't considered. So you might ask, in this particular topic, whose viewpoint often isn't considered? Whose voice isn't considered in all of this? It makes me think of that story about the 3 little pigs, and when it's told through the wolf's perspective, and everybody's like, oh wow, that's kind of different. And then number 4, you can even have AI model a thinking process. So if it creates something, you can always ask afterwards, tell me about the process that you used to create that. And then it starts to show you the process. Or you might say, if we have this particular problem, what is the process that you might use to get to the final answer? And then have students sort of analyze all of that. Now, those are 4 just sort of like broad ideas of how you could use AI to amplify what you teach. And don't you see that with all of these examples, this isn't like, let's stop teaching whatever we're teaching so we can talk about AI. This is actually using AI to give you things to talk about, to give your students things to think about. And then it just opens up the door for AI literacy. So if you want a super concrete example of how this could work, this is one of my favorite activities. I do this in in-person workshops. I do lots of in-person workshops about artificial intelligence and AI literacy and all of that stuff at schools and school districts and at teacher conferences and everything. And I always love inserting this in as an example of how you can use AI to talk about what you're studying, but then also analyze it so that students are still thinking about the material. It's this little activity I like called Be the Bot. Here's how Be the Bot works. And by the way, that link on your screen right there will take you to a super, super simple, like Google Slides PowerPoint template that students can use where they can write the AI prompt up the top and then write what they think that it's going to say down at the bottom. So let me tell you about Be the Bot. Actually, I just did kind of tell you, but I'm going to like really explain it now. Here's how the Be the Bot activity works. So I might tell my students, hey, we've been studying this particular topic for a day or 2 or 3 or something. And I'm going to go, this is what I'm telling the students, I'm going to go to ChatGPT and I'm going to ask it this question about something that we're learning. But before I do, I want you to anticipate what it's going to say. And so that's where the students, if you want to use this little template, they pull up the template, they write out the prompt in the top box, and then the bottom box, they're making their best guess of what the AI is going to say. So in essence, they're really being the bot. I want you to be the bot. I want you to anticipate what it's going to say. And so then after it's done, then we sort of compare contrast. And so what I wanted to do real quick was give you an example of this. This is the activity that I do with teachers whenever I do like an in-person workshop about this. Is that whatever city we're in, wherever it is that we're in, I like to play sort of like the tourist game with the Be the Bot activity. And so check it out. It says, and I'm going to use I'm going to use the capital city of my state, Indiana. We're going to use Indianapolis on this. And so it says, I'm a tourist visiting Indianapolis. I'd like to see the popular sites while I'm there. Can you suggest what I should visit? And so I tell the teachers in the room, I say, okay, because we live in Indianapolis, I want you to make your list. What do you think it's going to say? And so then they anticipate what it's going to say. And then we run the prompt. And then as the prompt is coming on the screen, just like this, I got to tell you, there's always an audible buzz in the room because everybody's comparing their list with what the AI came up with. And they're like, oh, I got that. Oh, I got that one too. Oh, I didn't get that one. And then we get down to the end of the list. And at the end, they're like, I can't believe it didn't say this one because they had picked out something and it didn't make their list, So then we scroll up and down through the list here and I'll say, okay, what did you think about the AI list? Was it any good? How do you know if it's good? Did it leave anything out? Did it give you anything that you didn't consider? Did it make any mistakes? How would you change it? How do you think that it was formatted? Because you see on this one, it grouped it by museums and culture, iconic landmarks, and then parks and outdoor experiences. Sometimes it gives me an itinerary. Sometimes I say, hey, I'm going to be there for 2 days. Tell me what I should do. And it says on this day you should do this, and on this day you should do this. And then the other thing you could also ask is what was left out? Were there any perspectives that were left out? In this case, we have museums and culture, we have iconic landmarks and sports, and we have parks and outdoor experiences. Is there another category that was left out that isn't there? And so you see, whenever we're doing all of this, you look at this activity. Is this an AI activity? Not really. It's an activity, in this case, about Indianapolis. And no matter what it is that you teach, you could pretty much insert whatever topic is that you're teaching into this. Of course, you're not going to phrase it as a tourist, but there's other ways that you could do this so that it fits what you're teaching, right? So for instance, let's go to a couple of examples. If you're in elementary and you're studying, you're reading the book Wonder, who's the most courageous character in the book Wonder? And you ask it that, and you tell the students, before it tells you, I want you to make your guess and tell me why. In math class, what are the most useful types of math in everyday life? In science class, which of these 5 environmental problems is the most urgent to solve? And you could ask it for the 5 problems, or you could come up with your own. In health, what's the most important habit for a healthy lifestyle? Any of those questions. Before I ask AI, I want you to make your best guesses. And so really, with any of this, you could apply this to what you teach, and then it gives your students an opportunity to do some critical thinking about their response, because it's gonna relate to what you're teaching. So it's gonna help them to think more deeply about whatever it is that you're teaching. But it also gives you an opportunity to talk about what AI did. And so what's happening in this activity? We have these little small lessons about AI. So for instance, like I was saying earlier, you're going to compare, contrast the list that AI generates with yours. You go, was there anything surprising? Was there anything biased? Was there anything that's just off? You're going to analyze what assumptions AI had to make that weren't specific to our prompt. Remember, if you remember my prompt, in fact, let me just put it up here again. My prompt was pretty vague. I'm a tourist visiting Indianapolis. I'd like to see the popular sites. Can you suggest what I visit? What did I give them? Popular sites. That's it. In fact, I will tell you, whenever I do these Be the Bot activities, I always like to give a very vague prompt. Because a lot of times there's somebody in the room that will say, you know, if you had asked this a little bit differently, it would give you something completely different. It hurts me a little bit on the inside whenever I put my vague prompt up there, because I'm basically just begging people to improve on my prompt. Because I would love to model a nice specific prompt, but I always like to set them up to identify, oh wow, we could do this better, and then it's their idea instead of my idea. And I've always found that, you know, those are very powerful teaching moments whenever it's my student's idea, whether my students are teachers at professional development or if they're actually students in the classroom. So then we could always ask the question, okay, if we want to improve on this prompt, how could it be better? I'd like to see sites that are downtown. I'd like to see things that are off the beaten path. I'd like to see things that are popular for families, that are popular for couples, that are on a budget. I could say I'm staying at the Conrad. I can't afford to stay at the Conrad, but we could say I'm staying at the Conrad. Tell me things that are within a 5-block radius of it, and see how that starts to change things. What are we doing here? We're prompt engineering. We're teaching students about how to be better prompters. But if we're doing it in the context of what we're learning, you know, so you could say like, oh, who are the most courageous characters in the book Wonder? Well, how could we change that prompt? Who were the most creative characters? Who were the characters that had the most improvement that they could make in their, I don't know, any of that stuff. Whenever you give them the opportunity to sort of like riff on your prompt, there's AI literacy in that, isn't there? You could brainstorm different things to add to the prompt, and then of course analyze the format. We talked about all of those things. If you like this type of activity and you want to try it out yourself, I have found that these are the types of questions that make the best Be the Bot questions. And so you could go and you could say, you know, like, which character did this? That makes a terrible Be the Bot activity, because what are you doing? You're saying, hey, students, I'm going to ask AI which character did this particular thing, but before I ask AI, I want you to make your guess. And it's like a question that has only one right answer. Those don't make for good activities like this. So I always like to ask things that are like the best or the most important or the most influential. Make a recommendation, because if AI makes a recommendation, we can critique it and analyze it. Identify a turning point. Which one is the most? Which one is the least? Predict an outcome. If we do stuff like that, we ask AI to do that for us, it's making judgment calls in the background. And when it makes judgment calls in the background, it opens us up to be able to analyze and critique those, which gives students a great opportunity to have deep thinking about what you're learning, not about AI, although they are still learning about AI. Now, I did just mention analyze and critique. That's something we can be doing all the time. In fact, I've kind of called out analyzing and critiquing sort of on and off throughout this entire presentation, but I wanted to stop for just a second and put a little bit of extra emphasis on it, because I think it's important. It's something that we can constantly, regularly be doing. And honestly, if we want to provide students with an important AI literacy, with something that they can lean on as they go throughout their lives, it's just very simply, we need to always be critiquing. I call that my ABC rule. Always be critiquing, ABC. You know, the salespeople say always be closing. That's their ABC rule. To me, it's always be critiquing. No matter what AI creates for us, we can critique it. There are some AI platforms that will give students writing feedback. Students will write something in a document and it'll give feedback. ABC, always be critiquing. Ask your students, okay, AI gave you that feedback. Is it any good? How do you know? What would have been more helpful? How could it have done its job better? If it gives you a summary or a reading passage, ABC, always be critiquing. Look at it and tell students, hey, AI wrote this. Can you tell that it was AI? If so, how could you tell? How do you think that you could tell? If you were writing it, would you have come at it a little bit differently? If AI generates an image for you, ABC, always be critiquing. Is there any AI weirdness in this? Are you surprised at the format that it came up with? How might you have expected it to do it differently? Let me give you an example. This is something that comes right out of my AI presentations at schools and school districts, is that, I talked about how I would use AI to generate teaching materials and teaching resources. And we talked about, I would use the Peloponnesian War just as an example of something that like a social studies teacher might teach. And so we talked about lesson plans. Can it generate activities? Can it generate questions? Can it do all these things? And then I'm like, let's have a little fun with it. Summarize the Peloponnesian War on a 7th grade level and fit Taylor Swift song titles and lyrics in as often as you can. And so, of course, if you ask it to do that, what's it going to do? It's going to do it. But it's not always going to do a good job at it. That's the thing. So I asked for this, and I started reading it. And I remember the first time when I generated this a good while ago, I remember looking at it, and there was one word that just kept coming to mind. Cringe. This kind of makes me cringe. And the kids they'd turn it into an adjective. Mr. Miller, that's so cringy. That's so bad, And so here's the lesson that I learned from that. It doesn't have to be good to be usable. You remember how I told you earlier in my Be the Bot activity that I would write a very vague prompt in general, a very vague prompt that my students could notice so that they would want to try to improve on it? In that case, it wasn't good on purpose so that students would have something to critique. In this case, I don't have to go back to AI and go, oh, make me something better, make me something better. You can if you want to. It's kind of like your own teacher judgment, but you might consider giving them something that's less than ideal and saying, hey, AI created this for me. And then they start to read it, and it says, picture this, ancient Greece, sunshine, togas, but hold on, things are about to go down like a bad breakup between BFFs. And you read that first line, you're like, oh, that's not very good. Enter Athens and Sparta, the two coolest city-states around. Athens all about art and democracy and shaking it off with their fancy navy. And you go, oh, shaking it off with their fancy navy, that's terrible. I mean, technically, it is Taylor Swift shaking it off and everything. And then you go to the next one, Sparta, the jocks with their strict military and their never getting back together attitude. You're like, oh, this is awful. And the kids are like squirming in their desks and they're like, Mr. Miller, this is terrible. And I'm like, okay. You think it's terrible? You think it's so terrible? Huh? You do? Tell me how you'd improve it. That's your assignment. And so then they can go and take all of this stuff about the Peloponnesian War and what they've learned about the Peloponnesian War, and they try to improve on it. And then that's their assignment. And of course, what are they doing? Is this an assignment about Taylor Swift? No. Well, kind of. A little bit. Is it an assignment about AI? No. Kind of. It's got a little bit of it. Is it still about the Peloponnesian War, though? Yes. Is it a boring assignment where they have to just read a dry passage and answer questions? No. It's maybe a little bit better, but it's rooted out of something that isn't good, So that just goes to show you when it comes to, that's just a practical example there, when it comes to analyzing things and critiquing things, if you give them something and let them improve upon it, then that can be huge. Here's another one. You can always analyze the perspective that AI takes, because if you ask it to do something for you related to class or whatever, it's got to make some assumptions in the background. Let me give you an example. I wish I would have put the pictures for this into the slides, but I'll just have to describe it to you. One time when I was trying to look at and analyze some of the assumptions that had to happen in the background with AI, I went to a few different AI image generators. And I just very simply asked them for pictures of architects. Make me a picture of an architect. That was it. And so when you don't provide a lot of context to AI, guess what? It has to make assumptions. And whenever it makes assumptions, what is AI's favorite thing to do when it has to make assumptions? It relies back on the majority. It's looking through all of the data that it's used to learn about the world, all of its training, all of the connections that it's made between all of the like billions and billions and billions of data points. And it's trying to figure out what it thinks you're looking for. And when it does that, it has to make certain assumptions. Now, what some of the AI developers have learned is that whenever it makes a lot of those assumptions based on the statistical majority, the results that it gives are sometimes not what we like. And so then the AI developers have to adjust it some. Let me give you an example. With some of those pictures that I asked for of architects, you can probably imagine the pictures that we get because, most of the time, what does an architect look like? Well, based on just the way that the world has produced architects in this world, a lot of times, at least here in the United States, it's a bunch of white males, that look a certain way. And so I got lots of white male architects because AI had to make some assumptions in the background. Now, with some of the AI image generators, I used several of them. It showed a group of different types of people, males and females of, different skin colors and, different physical characteristics and everything. And so it mixed things up a little bit. But if it was working based on statistical majorities, it wouldn't have done that. So that's an example of AI developers making a conscious decision to change the way that AI creates what it creates for us. All of this stuff is an opportunity to look at the perspective that AI takes and the bias that it has towards certain things. And a lot of times when people think about bias, they think about, the big sort of like polarizing ones. Gender bias, racial bias, location bias. Sometimes there's even like religious bias. There's just, all of these different things that really make people upset because it pushes people into the margins or pushes people out, right? But the reality is that AI has bias on everything, because it's got to, whenever it has to make an assumption in the background, it has to lean in one direction or the other. Couple of examples. I want to give you a handful of examples here of things that were not the big, controversial, polarizing examples of bias. Coffee roasts. You may have seen me sipping on my coffee earlier. I'm kind of a coffee nerd, okay? Let me use a different word. I'm kind of a coffee snob. I have very particular things that I really love about coffee, and I love light roast coffee. But I have found that whenever I search for the best coffee roasts to brew at home, a lot of times I get dark roasts. And maybe dark roasts are more common in AI training data because of places like Starbucks that have much darker roast profiles because they want all of that coffee taste to show up in their sugary lattes. How about book genres? Thrillers and romances sell more than poetry and historical fiction, so maybe those are more likely to show up in your AI results. Football offenses. If you're watching this from not in the United States, of course, we're talking about US football, American football, right? The pass-heavy NFL might influence an AI model's suggestions on something about how to run an offense. And even vacation destinations, it seems like everybody loves beaches. That could overshadow other spots like mountainous places or, lakes or whatever. So AI bias is really everywhere. And so no matter what it is that you're studying, you might find out, is it leaning in one direction or another? And that could be a really great conversation for your students to have about the content that they're studying, about whatever it is that they're learning. Do you see AI leaning in a certain direction? So that one's number 4. Always be critiquing. Analyze and critique. All right, we got a couple more. This next one, and this one is the one that I think everybody has such a tangible experience with. Maybe not everybody, but lots of folks. And that is the idea of AI as it's applied to classwork. You talk about teachers and artificial intelligence, and one of the very first things they're going to talk about, and I don't blame them because I feel the impact of it in my own classroom, they want to talk about the academic integrity issues. They want to make sure that students are still thinking. They want to make sure students are still doing things, that they're still growing and developing. And if they just offload everything to AI, then they're not learning anything. They're not getting better as human beings. And so since teachers are feeling this, you also know that students are also experiencing this or have been talking about it or have been hearing about it and everything. And so in that case, classwork becomes another lens to be able to look at artificial intelligence and AI literacy. Because no matter what you're doing, if you're in the classroom learning, or if you're on the job and you're doing your work, or if you're doing some things in your personal life with other people, there will come a time, very often, when you have to ask, should I be using AI to do this? It's a question that everybody is going to wrestle with through our entire lives. And if we miss the conversations that we can have about our classwork, we miss out on an opportunity to talk about AI literacy through the lens of classwork. And I think the conversation should be deeper than, did you use AI to cheat? And I think a lot of times for teachers, if we don't know a whole lot about AI, if we're kind of nervous about how students are using it, if we feel like we don't have control and things are happening that we don't like and we don't know how to stop it, this is something that we sort of throw against the wall and we hope that it sticks. Did you use AI to cheat? And see, the problem with that, I think, is that it reduces the conversation down to a binary. Did you evokes a response of yes or no? Did you use AI to cheat, or did you not use AI to cheat? And so then it really should beg a whole bunch of follow-up questions like, what is cheating? How much AI is okay and how much isn't? I've been using this graphic, which I actually put a little link to if you want a downloadable copy of this to be able to look at it yourself, to be able to have conversations with your own students, to have conversations with your own staff. Feel free to use it. Lots of folks do. But this is sort of a spectrum that shows that it's not just a binary yes or no. I came up with this. This is through the lens of writing something like an essay. And so the question is, how much AI use is acceptable? How much is okay? How much isn't? I've used this graphic in a variety of different presentations. In fact, if you're watching this on the Ditch Summit and you've heard me talk about AI, sorry if you've already seen this and you've already heard about it, but it fits so nicely into this conversation too. Because you'll notice that up at the top, there's more AI creation. AI is doing more of the work. But down at the bottom, the humans are doing more of the work. And this just highlights and illustrates that in academic classwork, there is a spectrum. And it's better for us to be sort of like transparent and clear about what our expectations are, about how we define what's cheating and what's not. Or maybe instead of using the word cheating, we could say, we want to model how we want students to do the work responsibly. So you go up and down through this graphic and you see up at the very top, AI does student work for them with no thought by the student. Do we like that? No. Is that cheating? Yes. Probably, right? But if you go all the way down to the bottom, student does all their work without any assistance from AI or the internet. Do we like that? I don't know. Maybe we do. Is it cheating? No, probably not. Is it really preparing students for the world they're going to live in? I'd say in many cases, maybe it's not. And so if the top one isn't what we're looking for and the bottom one isn't what we're looking for, then the question becomes, teacher judgment. We're stuck in the messy middle and we have to figure out how much AI gets us to where we want to go. How much is really preparing students for the world that they're going to be living in? So you look at some of the ones in the middle, like third one from the top, student rewrites an AI-generated essay with their own ideas for improvement. That's like saying AI is going to write an essay. Maybe the teacher generates it with AI and gives it to the student and says, hey, show me how you would rework this. Does that feel like cheating? Some folks would say, yes, absolutely. I don't want them doing that. But then other folks might say, if I give them that, for my class of students who are struggling with writing, they're emerging writers, they're improving writers, maybe this gives them just the right amount of scaffolding so that maybe they can make adjustments to somebody else's writing instead of having the burden of doing it all themselves. You go third from the bottom. Student consults internet or AI for writing ideas, but then writes the essay themselves. In that case, AI is serving as inspiration. Is that okay? Is that too far? Is that overreach? the way that you identify what's okay and what's not is very much dependent on the students and the class and the content and the task, sometimes the time of year. I mean, just all of these different things. And so I think we've got to be thinking about it in terms of a spectrum and having a conversation about how do we do our work responsibly. And really, a good place to go sometimes is to have the conversation with your students from the beginning. What's okay and what's not, what's fair. Maybe put this graphic up there and tell them what seems like cheating and what doesn't seem like cheating, and how do you know? And then ask them, can we create some norms and expectations and guidelines for this class so that we know how we should do our business? When you ask students to do that instead of imposing it on them, it changes the way that they feel about it, right? A couple of things to know about this responsible use situation, and I'll go through these pretty quickly. Everyone else is struggling with this. I've been doing presentations about academic integrity with AI to schools and school districts and teachers all over the United States and beyond. Everybody's wrestling with this. It's not just you. But we can help students think differently about AI use, because if all they're hearing is just how can you use it to get around classwork, that's only one side of the argument. That's only one side of how the technology can be used. And if they don't hear anything else, that might be all that they get. Slowly but surely, the more conversations we have about it and the more that we talk about its place, we build a culture about how it's used. And that's how everything starts to grow a little bit. So we can discuss, the impact that AI has in our work and our life, and then start connecting those conversations in general to academic work. Okay, how do people use this? What would be okay, in this job field, in this situation? And then you start to pull those into, okay, in general, in classwork, how should we use it? See how if we're doing it very broadly, then eventually when we pull it into the classroom, we've already set the foundation with all these other conversations. And then at the end of the list here, follow through and follow up, which means if we make these norms and expectations and guidelines, we continue to call back to them. And then we ask students later, does this still feel right? Do we need to change it? All right, a couple of more quick ones before we wrap up. We are starting to get close. This is a big one. I think this is important. Be ready for AI to fail you. This has happened in my own classes, where I've incorporated an element of AI collaboration with students, and it doesn't go the way that I want. Now, it would be easy for me and easy for others to just say, oh, well, it didn't work. Well, apparently it's not any good. Apparently AI is not as smart as I thought. Apparently I'm not using it right. Apparently this is a terrible program. I'm never going to use it again. But when those failures happen, it's an opportunity to talk to your students about it. In fact, I want to show you an actual interaction that one of my students had with an AI chatbot. And so I was having her and her classmates write something. And then the AI chatbot would read what they wrote and then would give them feedback on it. And then as they completed the objectives for the assignment, it would check off the objectives. And when it had checked off all of the objectives, then they were done. Well, here's the thing, and this is from a student that I know that is, that wants to do the right thing, that wants to handle her business correctly and everything. She got done writing, and there were 5 objectives, but the AI chatbot only checked her off for 4 of them. And so she asked all of these follow-up questions, and eventually she resorted to all caps because she was getting frustrated. What do I need to do to complete learning objective 5? And it says, oh, well, all you need to do is receive feedback, rewrite your sentence, and this shows that you can improve. Since your sentences were already correct, next time try rewriting your sentences to practice the skill. And she's going, I did that. Why don't you give me credit for number 5? And it just wouldn't do it. So this was where I got to have a conversation with them where I say, hey, listen, sometimes AI is unexpected and you got to be ready for it. And I'd say for me as a teacher, I'm willing to be super flexible with you. If you've done everything that you're supposed to do, just come talk to me about it. But it's also a good lesson to learn, to understand that, AI isn't like traditional software. It doesn't give you the same results every single time. And so see, in that opportunity, using AI in class kind of blew up in my face a little bit. but it gave me an opportunity to talk to kids about the nature of AI and how you handle it when it doesn't show up the way that you want. So in that case, our failures can still be considered successes because we've had those conversations with students. Okay, bonus section. I wanted to touch on this here just a little bit at the end because, I don't know, I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought that you might kind of find it interesting too. I am putting the finishing touches on this book called AI Literacy in Any Class. And I used AI to write a book about AI. And so if you're curious about that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my process, just a little bit here at the very end. See, I already had a ton of stuff that I knew that I wanted to write about AI literacy and how it could be applied in the classroom and embedded into what we already teach. But I also knew that AI could be really helpful to me, but I didn't want it to write the book for me. I still wanted it to be very much a human creation. So here's kind of how I wrote a book about AI using AI. And my AI platform that I used was ChatGPT. In fact, I wrote a whole chapter about this, like a little mini chapter at the end of the book, if you want to read the whole thing. But I started off by brain dumping all of my ideas into a conversation with AI. I actually made it into, what was it, like a project, just like a space that was dedicated to, talking about AI literacy. And so I would talk about how I want to talk about this. And I would throw out all my ideas. And then afterwards I would say, can you summarize back to me what I just said? And tell me some ways that I can improve on it and maybe some gaps that I could fill. You see the place that I was asking AI to do in that brainstorming phase. I wasn't asking it to tell me what I should write. I wanted it to be my thought partner to tell me, how did this sound? And where could I expand it? What are some gaps that I could fill? So I did lots of that. And then when I was done, I realized that I had just dumped all of these ideas out into this conversation with ChatGPT. And so then I would have it summarize back, what have I told you about this? And so in that case, again, it's not inventing new ideas. It's just summarizing back to me. It's basically like taking all of my notes. It was like a note taker. Took all of my notes and then it would summarize back all of that stuff. And then I would say, okay, I want to organize this into chapters. This is a chapter that I want to have. What have I already said about this? And then I could again ask, how could I expand upon this? Where are some gaps that I could fill? Do I have any like logical disconnects or anything? And so I would ask it to come along with me on that. And then little by little, I would just keep having it recall ideas, and then I would ask it questions. Or actually, I would have it ask me questions. There were times where, I felt like I got down to the end of all of my ideas, and I would say, start asking me some questions that I might want to address in the book. And so it would ask me a question about AI literacy, and I'd go, oh, I forgot about talking about that. And so then I would brain dump all the ideas that were coming out of my own brain. So in that case, I was really using AI to prompt me instead of to come up with all of the ideas. Anyway, that's something. The thing that was interesting about that to me was that I was using a lot of those same AI literacy ideas that I'd been talking about throughout the whole book, only I was applying them through the lens of a book. And so that just really goes to show that, in this case, AI literacy isn't about using more AI. It's not like saying, oh, we need to start using chatbots with students. We need to have students generating this stuff. We need to start using ChatGPT in our classwork. No, it's not that. It's really about helping students to understand the implications of AI on their life and their work, and how to show up responsibly and what to do and how to handle their business in the right way. It isn't about using more technology. It's about how you think about the technology and when you should use it, but also when you shouldn't use it. And how can you tell whether it's right or wrong? And how do you keep yourself safe? And how do you proceed cautiously? And the great thing about all of this is that AI literacy can actually support what we teach. And I've shown you some examples of that, hopefully, where if we incorporate a little bit of AI, we can analyze the stuff that it gave us through the lens of what we're teaching. We can throw in some of those by the way lessons. We can use it to augment what we're already teaching. This is what I've been writing about for a good long while now. And actually, these are sort of like these are the chapter titles, sort of the rough draft chapter titles. I still don't even have final chapter titles yet, but these are the things that I've written about in this book. And you'll notice, well, actually, I didn't put in the one about how I used AI to write the book, but you'll notice at the end, I even wrote these little letters to specific audiences, to parents, to primary teachers. Because I know if you're a K-2 teacher, you probably look at all this stuff and you go, I don't need my students using AI, and that's fine. But there are still little things that you can do to small shifts in the way that you describe things that help to build a foundation for students. For example, if you're a K-2 teacher and you were to generate an image with AI and put it up on the screen, maybe it's an example of, it's an extra illustration on a read aloud that you're doing. You tell the students, the computer made this for me. Just something simple like that starts to show that delineation between this isn't human, this is created by technology. So anyway, if you're interested in learning a little more about this book, you can get updates on it by going to ditch.link/join, which will sign you up for my Ditch That Textbook email newsletter, which actually, if you're watching this in the Ditch Summit, you're probably already subscribed to, but that's the place to be able to find out about it. If you're watching this beyond 2025, then the book is probably already ready and available if you want to go check it out. But no matter what, one way or another, whether you check out the book or not, hopefully this is an idea that resonates with you. It's something that I'm excited about, and hopefully you think that it's helpful too, this idea that AI literacy can support whatever it is that you're teaching, and it can also start to prepare students for the future. So anyway, that's what I've got for you. I hope that that's helpful. My name is Matt Miller, the host of the summit and the creator of this presentation for you. And so I hope that you take some of these ideas forward, and that they're able to support what you do in the classroom. So, and as always, thank you so much for being a part of the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, and we'll catch you on the next session. Take care.